Welcome to Mystery Tales. I'm Alex, your host for this chilling journey into the heart of a classic whodunit. Tonight we embark on an original Agatha Christie-style mystery. Death of the Vicar at Hollow Bridge, a deadly Miss Marple story. Picture yourself in a cozy nook, perhaps with a warm drink, as we unravel this tale over 90 minutes of suspense. My voice, slow and deliberate, will guide you through the misty lanes of 1920s England. If you're new, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to join our community of mystery lovers. And do tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? A foggy London flat or a quiet countryside cottage? Chapter 1. The quiet village of Hollow Bridge. In the autumn of 1925, the village of Hollow Bridge lay cradled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, a mere hour's train ride from London's clamor. It was a place where time seemed to pause, where the ancient stone bridge, its arches weathered by centuries, spanned a murmuring river that locals swore carried secrets in its ripples. The church, with its tall spire piercing the low-hanging mist, stood as the village's heart, its bells tolling softly each Sunday to summon the faithful. Beside it, the vicarage, a sprawling Georgian house cloaked in ivy, housed Reverend Thomas Hargrove, a man whose sermons thundered with divine wrath, though his temper often flared with all too human fire. Miss Jane Marple, that keen-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, had arrived in Hollow Bridge for what she described as a little holiday. In truth, her old friend Lady Amelia Worthington had summoned her with an urgent letter. Lady Amelia, a widow of considerable wealth and sharper intuition, resided at Worthington Manor, a grand estate perched on a hill overlooking the village. Over a delicate spread of scones and Darjeeling in the manor's rose-draped conservatory, Lady Amelia confided her unease. "It's the vicar, Jane," she said, her voice low. "Thomas Hargrove has been peculiar. Quarrels with half the parish, strange letters arriving at odd hours, and a darkness in his manner. I fear trouble brews." Miss Marple, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically in her lap, listened with the quiet intensity of one accustomed to unraveling human nature's tangled threads. Her blue eyes, sharp behind their gentle twinkle, missed nothing. Not the tremor in Lady Amelia's hand, nor the distant chime of the church bell, slightly off-key. "People are much the same everywhere, Amelia dear," she remarked, her voice soft as the velvet cushions around them. "Secrets, like weeds, grow best in quiet places. They always find a way to the surface." Hollow Bridge was a small world, but its cast of characters was vivid, each carrying their own burdens and desires. The vicarage household was a microcosm of tension. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, the vicar's wife, was a woman of faded elegance, her once radiant beauty dulled by years in a cold marriage. Her early 40s, she moved through the vicarage with a ghostly grace, her eyes often red-rimmed. Whispers in the village tea shop suggested she found solace elsewhere, perhaps with Dr. Reginald Blackwood, the local physician. A widower in his late 30s, Dr. Blackwood cut a dashing figure with his neatly trimmed beard and steady hands, though his practice in the village square was said to be struggling under mysterious debts. Then there was Neville Hargrove, the vicar's nephew, a lanky young man of 25 whose charm was as polished as his debts were deep. Fresh from London's gambling dens, he had returned to Hollow Bridge under a cloud, his uncle's begrudging hospitality his only refuge. Neville's eyes, sharp and restless, seemed always to be calculating. Whether the next card game or his uncle's fortune, no one could say. Silas Thorne, the vicarage gardener, was a grizzled figure, his face etched by the scars of the Great War and a life of hard labor. At 60, he tended the roses with a grudging diligence, but his resentment toward the vicar was no secret. A public row over unpaid wages had erupted in the churchyard after Sunday service, Silas's voice carrying like thunder. "You'll pay what's owed, Hargrove, or I'll have it out of you one way or another." Lizzie Croft, the vicarage maid, was a bright spark in the gloomy house. 19, with rosy cheeks and a quick laugh, she flitted about her duties with an ease that belied her sharp tongue. Some villagers muttered that Lizzie knew more than a maid should, snippets of overheard arguments, glimpses of private moments. Her boldness had once earned a sharp rebuke from the vicar, though what sparked it remained a mystery. Beyond the vicarage, Sir Geoffrey Langford loomed large. The local squire, he lived in a Tudor manor on the village's edge, his family's wealth tied to land that bordered the vicar's own. A bluff, ruddy-faced man in his 50s, Sir Geoffrey had clashed with Reverend Hargrove for years over a narrow path by the hollow bridge, a strip of land both claimed as their own. "That sanctimonious fool thinks he owns the very earth," Sir Geoffrey had bellowed at the Red Lion pub, his tankard slamming the bar. "I'll see him humbled yet." Miss Marple, ever observant, took her evening walk through Hollow Bridge's winding lanes. The air was crisp, scented with wood smoke and damp earth. Fallen leaves crunched under her sensible shoes as she paused at the bridge, its stones cool under her gloved hand. The river below whispered softly, its surface catching the last light of dusk. She noted the vicarage windows glowing faintly, the shadow of someone moving within. Was it Mrs. Hargrove, restless in her gilded cage, or Neville, plotting his next move? At Worthington Manor, Lady Amelia hosted a small dinner that evening, inviting the village's key figures to welcome Miss Marple. The dining room, aglow with candlelight, hummed with polite tension. Mrs. Hargrove picked at her food, her gaze flickering to Dr. Blackwood, who spoke too smoothly of London's latest medical advancements. Neville, seated beside Miss Marple, regaled her with tales of the city, his charm undercut by a nervous tick in his jaw. Silas, though not invited, was seen lingering by the manor gates, his silhouette stark against the twilight. Sir Geoffrey arrived late, his booming laugh masking a sharp glance at the vicar who sat at the table's head, his face taut. Reverend Hargrove spoke little, his fingers drumming on the tablecloth. Miss Marple noted a folded letter protruding from his pocket, its wax seal cracked. "A fine village, Miss Marple," he said abruptly, catching her gaze. "But even Eden had its serpents." His words hung in the air, unanswered as the clock struck 9. As the guests departed, Miss Marple lingered on the manor's terrace, her shawl drawn tight against the chill. The village lay quiet save for the distant hoot of an owl. She thought of her own St. Mary Mead, where every smile hid a story, every glance a clue. Hollow Bridge, she sensed, was no different. The vicar's unease, the whispers of scandal, the weight of unspoken grudges. It was a tapestry waiting to be unpicked. Little did she know, as the stars emerged above the hollow bridge, that death was already weaving its own pattern, ready to unravel the fragile peace of the village. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Vicarage. The morning of October 12, 1925, broke over Hollow Bridge with a deceptive calm, the kind that masks a storm waiting to unleash. A thin mist clung to the village, softening the edges of the ancient stone bridge and veiling the church spire in a ghostly haze. The vicarage, with its ivy-draped walls and leaded windows, stood silent, its chimneys puffing faint smoke into the dawn. Inside, however, chaos was about to erupt, shattering the illusion of peace that had held the village in its gentle grip. Lizzie Croft, the young maid with her quick smile and sharper eyes, moved through the vicarage's dim hallways, her apron crisp despite the early hour. It was just past 7 when she approached the study door, a tray of tea and toast balanced in her hands. "Reverend Hargrove," she called, her voice light but tentative. "Breakfast, sir." Silence answered her. She knocked again, louder this time, the sound echoing in the still house. The door remained shut, the heavy oak unyielding. Frowning, Lizzie set the tray on a side table and tried the handle. Locked. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. The vicar was an early riser, often at his desk by dawn, scribbling sermons or reading his well-worn Bible. She pressed her ear to the door, hearing nothing but the faint tick of the mantel clock inside. Curiosity overcoming propriety, she knelt and peered through the keyhole. What she saw stole her breath. A glimpse of the vicar's hand limp on the desk and a dark stain spreading across the green blotter. Pistol gleamed dully beside it. Lizzie's scream tore through the vicarage, sharp and piercing. It brought Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove rushing from her upstairs room, her nightdress hastily covered by a shawl, her face pale as moonlight. "Lizzie, what on earth?" She froze as the maid pointed to the study door, stammering, He's dead, ma'am. The vicar." Mrs. Hargrove's hand flew to her mouth and she swayed, clutching the banister. Footsteps thudded as Neville Hargrove, the vicar's nephew, appeared, his hair tousled and his shirt half-buttoned. "What's all this racket?" he demanded, his London accent cutting through the morning's quiet. Lizzie, trembling, could only point. Neville strode to the door, tried the handle, then pounded on it. "Uncle Thomas, open up." When no response came, he turned to Lizzie. "You're sure you saw—" "Blood," she whispered, "and a gun." The commotion drew Silas Thorne, the grizzled gardener, from the rose beds outside. His boots, caked with morning dew and mud, left prints on the polished floor as he entered through the kitchen door. "What's happened?" he growled, his war-scarred face grim. Mrs. Hargrove, her voice breaking, managed, "Thomas, something's terribly wrong." Word was sent to Dr. Reginald Blackwood, who arrived within the hour, his medical bag swinging at his side. The village physician, with his steady gaze and neatly trimmed beard, pushed past the gathered household and knelt by the locked door. "We need to get in," he said, his tone clipped. Neville, with a strength born of urgency, shouldered the door, but it held fast. Silas fetched a crowbar from his shed, and together they forced the lock, the wood splintering with a sharp crack. The study revealed a scene frozen in time. Reverend Thomas Hargrove sat slumped over his oak desk, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Blood, dark and congealed, pooled beneath his temple, staining the sermon notes scattered before him. A pistol, his own, kept in a drawer for protection, lay in his limp hand. The room was otherwise untouched. Books lined the shelves, a single lamp burned low, and the heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight. The windows, bolted from within, admitted no draught, and the door's key remained in the lock on the inside. Dr. Blackwood knelt beside the body, his fingers probing gently. "Shot through the right temple," he murmured. "Point-blank range, likely instantaneous." He glanced at the pistol, then at the locked door and windows. "Looks like suicide, but—" His voice trailed off, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "No powder burns on his hand. Odd." Mrs. Hargrove stifled a sob, turning away. Neville stood rigid, his jaw tight, while Lizzie hovered near the doorway, her hands twisting her apron. Silas, leaning against the wall, muttered, "Man like him had enemies. Maybe he didn't pull that trigger." By noon, the village buzzed with the news, whispers spreading like ripples across the river. Inspector Harold Craddock from Scotland Yard arrived, summoned by the local constable who deemed the case too complex for village handling. A stout man with a bristling mustache and a no-nonsense air, Craddock surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. "Locked room, you say?" he mused, pacing the study. Door locked from inside, windows bolted, key in place, curiouser and curiouser. He ordered the room sealed, forbidding anyone to touch the desk, the lamp, or the blood-stained papers. Miss Marple, informed of the tragedy by a breathless messenger from Lady Amelia, insisted on visiting the vicarage. "Such a dreadful thing," she said, her knitting bag tucked under her arm as she and Lady Amelia made their way down the lane. The manor's warmth felt far away as they stepped into the vicarage, where grief and suspicion hung heavy. Mrs. Hargrove sat in the drawing room, a handkerchief pressed to her lips while Neville paced like a caged animal. Lizzie served tea with trembling hands, and Silas lingered in the hall, his eyes dark with unspoken thoughts. Sir Geoffrey Langford, the squire, arrived unexpectedly, claiming to offer condolences, though his sharp glance at the study door suggested other motives. Inspector Craddock questioned the household briefly. "Anyone hear the shot?" he asked, his notebook open. Heads shook. The vicar's death had occurred sometime after midnight, when the house was asleep. The pistol, Craddock confirmed, was indeed Hargrove's, kept in the study drawer. No suicide note was found, only a half-written sermon on the wages of sin, its ink smudged as if abandoned mid-thought. A single wax drip out of place on the desk caught Craddock's eye, but he said nothing. Miss Marple, seated quietly in a corner, let her knitting needles click rhythmically, her eyes darting from face to face. She noted the mud on Silas's boots, fresh despite the dry night. Dr. Blackwood's handkerchief carried a faint trace of lavender, matching the scent of Mrs. Hargrove's perfume. Neville's fingers twitched, betraying nerves beyond mere grief. Lizzie's gaze flickered too often to the study door, as if drawn by guilt or fear. And Sir Geoffrey, standing stiffly by the fireplace, seemed too eager to dismiss the tragedy as the vicar's own doing. "Such a terrible loss," Miss Marple murmured, her voice soft but carrying. "But tragedies, like tapestries, often reveal their patterns only when you step back." She sipped her tea, her mind already threading together the fragments of the morning's horror. The locked room, the silent shot, the wax strip, each a stitch in a design yet to be revealed. Chapter 3. Whispers of Motive. The afternoon sun struggled through the clouds over Hollow Bridge on October 12, 1925, casting a pale glow on the vicarage where the air was thick with grief and suspicion. The village, usually alive with the chatter of market stalls and the clop of horses, had fallen into a hushed unease, as if the river itself held its breath. Inside the vicarage, Inspector Harold Craddock moved with methodical precision, his boots clicking on the polished floor as he interviewed the household. His notebook, already filled with scribbled observations, lay open on the drawing-room table where Miss Jane Marple sat quietly, her knitting needles a soft counterpoint to the tension. Miss Marple had joined Lady Amelia Worthington for what was meant to be a condolence visit, but her presence was no mere courtesy. Her sharp blue eyes, framed by her unassuming bonnet, missed nothing. The tremble in Mrs. Hargrove's hands, the flicker of Neville's gaze, the way Lizzie Croft lingered too long near the study door. Lady Amelia, ever the gracious host, had insisted on tea, and the group now sat in the drawing-room, an uneasy assembly of suspects under the guise of mourning. Inspector Craddock, his mustache twitching like a barometer of suspicion, began with Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove. The vicar's wife sat pale and fragile, her dark hair pinned tightly, her eyes red from tears, or perhaps sleeplessness. "Mrs. Hargrove," Craddock said, his tone firm yet not unkind, "can you tell me about your husband's state of mind these past weeks?" Eleanor's fingers twisted her handkerchief. "Thomas was difficult," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was a man of strong convictions, but lately he'd grown irritable, secretive. We hadn't been close for years." Her gaze darted to Dr. Reginald Blackwood, who stood by the window, his handsome face impassive. "He found out about my friendship with Dr. Blackwood. He was furious, threatened to ruin us both." A murmur rippled through the room. Motive. Escape from a controlling, loveless marriage. Craddock turned to Dr. Blackwood, whose calm demeanor belied the weight of accusation. "Is this true, doctor?" The physician adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous tick. "The vicar was paranoid," he said evenly. "I prescribed him sedatives for insomnia, but he accused me of tampering with them. Poison, he said. Utter nonsense, but he threatened to report me to the medical board. It could have ended my career. His eyes met Eleanor's briefly, a silent acknowledgement. Motive: protecting his reputation and livelihood. Neville Hargrove, lounging in an armchair, was next. The vicar's nephew, with his slicked-back hair and restless energy, seemed more irritated than grieved. "Uncle Thomas was a tight-fisted old goat," he said bluntly. "I'm his heir, you know, or was until last week. He cut me off when he learned about my debts in London. Said I'd get nothing unless he died of natural causes." Neville's smirk was fleeting but telling. Motive: a substantial inheritance now at risk. Silas Thorne, the gardener, stood at the room's edge, his weathered hands clasped tightly. His voice was gruff, laced with resentment. "Hargrove owed me 50 quid for months of work. Kept saying the church funds were low. We had words, loud ones, in the churchyard. I told him I'd make him pay one way or t'other." His eyes narrowed, unapologetic. Motive: revenge for unpaid wages and public humiliation. Lizzie Croft, the maid, fidgeted as Craddock's gaze fell on her. Her rosy cheeks flushed deeper under scrutiny. I heard things, sir," she stammered. "Arguments late at night. The vicar, he tried to... Well, he was improper with me once, months back. I told him I'd speak out if he tried again." Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she glanced at Neville, who looked away. Motive: protecting herself from scandal or worse. Sir Geoffrey Langford, the squire, had arrived uninvited, his booming presence filling the room. "Just a neighborly call," he said, but his eyes gleamed with something less charitable. When pressed, he laughed off Craddock's questions. "Hargrove and I had our spats, land disputes mostly. That path by the bridge, it's been a sore point for years, but murder? Preposterous." Yet his alibi, a solitary walk by the river at midnight, raised eyebrows. Motive: settling an old feud, perhaps with more than words. Miss Marple, her knitting a steady rhythm, absorbed every word, every glance. She noted discrepancies that Craddock, in his brisk efficiency, overlooked. A smudged footprint near the study window, too small for Silas's heavy boots. A torn scrap of paper in the wastebasket, its ink suggesting a letter written in haste. The faint scent of lavender on Dr. Blackwood's coat matching Mrs. Hargrove's perfume. Neville's fidgety hands, betraying more than grief. Lizzie's nervous glances toward the study as if drawn by guilt or knowledge, and Sir Geoffrey's too loud laugh, a mask for something darker. Craddock, pacing, returned to the locked room puzzle. No one heard the shot, he mused. Pistol was Hargrove's own, kept in that desk. Key in the lock, windows bolted. Suicide seems likely, but... He frowned at the wax drip on the desk, out of place beside the oil lamp. "We'll need to test the pistol's report. A shot like that should have woken the house." Miss Marple, sipping her tea, ventured a quiet observation. "The clock in the study, Inspector, it stopped at 12:05. The vicar wound it daily, yet it was untouched this morning. Curious, don't you think?" Craddock nodded, jotting it down, but his focus remained on the suspects' alibis, each shakier than the last. Lady Amelia, ever the mediator, invited the group to Worthington Manor for dinner that evening, hoping to ease tensions. The meal was a strained affair, the clink of silverware loud in the silence. Mrs. Hargrove barely touched her food, her eyes fixed on her plate. Dr. Blackwood spoke of medical journals, his voice too steady. Neville's charm felt forced, his jokes falling flat. Silas, though not invited to dine, was seen, lingering by the manor's gates, his silhouette stark against the dusk. Sir Geoffrey, late again, regaled the table with tales of his estate, but his gaze lingered on the vicarage across the valley. Miss Marple, seated beside Lady Amelia, watched it all. She noted a faint stain on Lizzie's apron, ink, perhaps, from a letter. Neville's cufflink, loose and glinting, matched one she'd seen near the study door. The air was thick with unspoken alliances and hidden grudges, each suspect a thread in a tapestry of deceit. As the evening drew to a close, Miss Marple stepped onto the manor's terrace, the cool air sharp with the scent of autumn leaves. The village lay quiet below, the hollow bridge a dark silhouette against the moonlit river. Human nature, she murmured to herself, is never quite as simple as it seems. The vicar's death, locked room or not, was no mere tragedy. It was a puzzle, and Miss Marple was already piecing it together, one quiet observation at a time. Chapter 4. The Locked Door Enigma. By the evening of October 12, 1925, Hollow Bridge was a village holding its breath. The vicarage, once a beacon of moral certainty, now stood as a monument to mystery, its locked study door guarding secrets as stubbornly as the ancient bridge guarded the river's path. Inspector Harold Craddock, his mustache bristling with determination, had spent the day combing the crime scene, his notebook filling with details that both clarified and confounded. The death of Reverend Thomas Hargrove, found shot in a room locked from within, defied easy explanation. Miss Jane Marple, ever the quiet observer, accompanied Lady Amelia Worthington to the vicarage, her knitting bag a constant companion, her mind sharper than the needles within. The study itself was a puzzle wrapped in oak and velvet. The heavy door, locked with the key still inside, had been forced open by Neville and Silas, its splintered frame a testament to their urgency. The windows, bolted shut, showed no signs of tampering, their latches rusted from disuse. The room's contents were deceptively simple. A broad oak desk, its surface stained with blood and ink, a single oil lamp still flickering faintly, bookshelves crammed with theological tomes, and a stopped clock, its hands frozen at 12:05. The pistol, confirmed as the vicar's own, lay where it had fallen, its single shot a silent scream in the night. Yet the question gnawed at Craddock. How had no one heard the gunshot? The inspector gathered the household in the drawing room, his questions sharp but methodical. A pistol like that, he said, tapping his pencil, would echo across the village, yet you all slept through it. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, her face pale as the lace at her throat, shook her head. I took a sleeping draught, she murmured. I heard nothing. Dr. Reginald Blackwood nodded agreement. I was at my practice, late with paperwork. Neville Hargrove shrugged, his eyes evasive. Dead asleep, I'm afraid. Lizzie Croft, the maid, claimed she'd been in the attic room too far to hear. Silas Thorne, the gardener, grunted, I sleep like a stone. Sir Geoffrey Langford, present despite no invitation, scoffed. I was out walking rivers loud at night. Craddock's eyes narrowed, but he let the alibis stand for now. Miss Marple, seated by the fireplace, her knitting a soft rhythm, studied the room's edges. She noted a curious detail. A single wax drip on the desk, hardened in a perfect circle unrelated to the oil lamp's steady glow. Most peculiar, she murmured to Lady Amelia, who leaned closer. That wax isn't from the lamp, and this string, caught under the rug, oddly out of place. Craddock, overhearing, inspected the string. A thin, frayed cord, barely noticeable. He tucked it into an evidence bag, his brow furrowed. The investigation deepened as clues emerged, each a thread in the tapestry of deceit. In Silas's shed, Craddock found a bloody handkerchief, its edges stained with what looked like the vicar's blood. Care to explain this, Thorne? The inspector demanded. Silas's face darkened. Not mine. Someone's playing tricks. The cloth was sent for testing, but Miss Marple noted its pristine folds, too clean for a gardener's rough hands. A red herring, perhaps. In Lizzie's attic room, a search revealed a crumpled love note, unsigned but hinting at a scandalous affair. Meet me at midnight, it read, in a hand that didn't match the vicar's. Lizzie blushed furiously, insisting it was old, unrelated. Found it in the hall weeks ago, she stammered. Craddock raised an eyebrow but let it pass. Miss Marple, however, noticed the ink. Fresh, not faded. Another false clue? The study yielded more. A book on the shelf, a dense volume on ecclesiastical law, was slightly askew, its pages dog-eared at a passage on inheritance disputes. Beside it, a torn letter in the wastebasket bore fragments of angry words. Betrayal. Ruin. You'll pay. The handwriting was unsteady, possibly the Vicar's, but the ink matched the love notes. Miss Marple's needles paused. Curious, she said softly. How clues point in every direction but the truth. Craddock ordered a test of the pistol's report, conducted in the churchyard that afternoon. The shot rang out, loud enough to startle rooks from the trees and draw villagers to their windows. Impossible, Craddock muttered. That sound would have woken half the parish. Yet no one had stirred. He examined the study's walls, finding no hidden panels or secret exits. The locked room remained an enigma, its silence as baffling as the crime itself. Miss Marple, permitted to view the study, moved with quiet purpose. She knelt by the desk, her gloved fingers tracing the wax drip. Not lamp wax, she murmured. Candle, perhaps. She examined the clock, its mechanism jammed, not merely unwound. The string under the rug, she noted, led to the window, where a faint smudge marked the sill, not mud, but something finer like ash. Someone was careful, she said to herself, but not careful enough. The household, meanwhile, turned on each other. Neville accused Silas of planting the handkerchief, his voice sharp with contempt. You hated him, Thorne. Everyone heard you threaten him, Silas spat back. And you'd kill for his money, boy. Mrs. Hargrove, her composure fraying, pointed at Sir Geoffrey. He wanted that land, always did. He was out that night, wasn't he? Sir Geoffrey laughed too loudly. Nonsense, Eleanor. You and your doctor friend had more reason to want him gone. Dr. Blackwood stiffened, his hand brushing his lavender-scented coat. Lizzie, silent, watched them all, her eyes wide with something like fear or guilt. That evening, as the village settled into an uneasy dusk, Miss Marple walked the hollow bridge with Lady Amelia. The river murmured below, its secrets locked in its flow. It's a clever puzzle, Miss Marple said, her voice soft as the twilight. The locked room, the silent shot, the misplaced clues, all designed to mislead. But human nature, Amelia dear, is never so tidy. She paused, her eyes on the vicarage's glowing windows. Someone planned this carefully, but no plan is perfect. Lady Amelia shivered, pulling her shawl tight. Do you think it's one of them, Jane? Or someone we haven't seen? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Oh, it's one of them. The clues are there, scattered like leaves. We need only gather them. As they returned to Worthington Manor, the church bell tolled, its note slightly off-key, as if mourning the truth still hidden. Miss Marple's mind, however, was already at work, piecing together the fragments, the wax, the string, the stopped clock, the smudged sill. The locked room was not impenetrable, she sensed, but its key lay not in wood or iron, but in the hearts of those who walked the vicarage halls. Chapter 5. Hidden Alliances. By the morning of October 13th, 1925, Hollow Bridge was a village on edge, its quiet lanes buzzing with whispers of murder. The vicarage, once a haven of piety, now stood as a fortress of secrets, its locked study a silent testament to Reverend Thomas Hargrove's violent end. Inspector Harold Craddock, his mustache bristling with frustration, pored over the evidence, but the locked room, door sealed, windows bolted, key inside, defied logic. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag ever present, moved through the village like a shadow, her gentle demeanor masking a mind as sharp as a blade. At Worthington Manor, Lady Amelia Worthington watched her friend with growing awe, sensing that the spinster's quiet observations were weaving a net around the truth. The day began with a revelation that sent ripples through the investigation. Inspector Craddock, reviewing letters found in the vicar's desk, uncovered a series of intimate notes between Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove and Dr. Reginald Blackwood. The correspondence, hidden in a locked drawer, spoke of stolen moments and desperate plans. "My dearest," one read, "he knows, and his wrath is unbearable. We must find a way." Eleanor, confronted in the vicarage drawing-room, crumbled under Craddock's steady gaze. "Yes," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Reginald and I, we love each other. Thomas found out weeks ago. He threatened to expose us, to ruin Reginald's practice." Her eyes, red-rimmed, met Dr. Blackwood's across the room. He stood rigid, his hands clenched. "I'd have done anything to protect her," he said quietly. "But murder? Never." Yet the inspector's notebook gained a new entry, a confirmed affair, a motive sharpened by scandal. Miss Marple, seated by the window, her needles clicking softly, noted the doctor's lavender-scented handkerchief, its fragrance a silent echo of Eleanor's perfume. "Love," she murmured to Lady Amelia, "is a powerful force, but it often blinds as much as it binds." The investigation took a darker turn when Craddock caught Neville Hargrove tampering with the vicarage safe. The young man, his face flushed with panic, had been prying at the lock when the inspector entered. "Just looking for family papers," Neville stammered, but a bundle of banknotes, marked with the vicar's initials, spilled from his pocket. "You're in debt up to your eyes, aren't you?" Craddock pressed. Neville's bravado faltered. "Uncle Thomas cut me off, but I didn't kill him. I needed cash, yes, but I'd never—" His voice trailed off, unconvincing. Motive. Theft to fuel a desperate lifestyle now compounded by suspicion. A false clue surfaced, muddying the waters. A vial of arsenic labeled as rat poison was found in the vicarage pantry, its cap loose. Gossip swirled that the vicar had been poisoned before the gunshot, a theory bolstered by his recent complaints of nausea. Dr. Blackwood, however, examined the body again and shook his head. "No trace of poison in the autopsy," he reported. "The gunshot alone killed him." The vial, it seemed, was a red herring, perhaps planted to mislead. Miss Marple, inspecting the pantry, noted the vial's pristine condition, untouched by dust. "Someone," she said softly, "is playing a clever game." The most startling twist came from an unexpected quarter. Miss Marple, lingering in the vicarage hall, overheard a hushed exchange between Lizzie Croft and Neville Hargrove behind the kitchen door. "We can't let them know," Lizzie whispered, her voice tight with fear. "If they find out about us—" Neville's reply was sharp. "Keep quiet, Liz. The money's ours if we play this right." Miss Marple's needles paused. Later discreet inquiries revealed a hidden romance. Lizzie and Neville, lovers in secret, had been plotting to secure the vicar's inheritance. Lizzie's knowledge of the household secrets, gained through her maid's duties, paired with Neville's greed, painted a dangerous picture. Motive, a shared scheme to gain wealth, now threatened by the vicar's untimely death. Craddock, informed of this alliance, questioned Lizzie sharply. The maid, her rosy cheeks pale, denied involvement in the murder. "We only wanted to wait him out," she insisted. "He was old, wasn't he? We never meant harm." Neville, cornered, echoed her denial, but his twitching hands betrayed him. Miss Marple, watching, noted a faint ink stain on Lizzie's apron, matching the torn letter from the study. "Young love," she mused to Lady Amelia, "can be as reckless as it is passionate." The locked room puzzle persisted, gnawing at Craddock's logic. He re-examined the study, finding no new exits, but lingering on the wax strip Miss Marple had pointed out. "Candle wax, not lamp," he confirmed, puzzled. A local gunsmith called to test the pistol noted its barrel was clean, almost too clean for a recent shot. Could have been wiped, he suggested, deepening the mystery. The string under the rug, Miss Marple's earlier find, was sent for analysis, its frayed end hinting at manipulation. Someone, Craddock muttered, went to great lengths to make this look like suicide. The village, meanwhile, buzzed with theories. At the Red Lion pub, Sir Geoffrey Langford held court, dismissing the murder talk as village nonsense. Yet his loud laughter rang hollow, and Miss Marple, passing by, overheard a barmaid whisper of seeing him near the vicarage at midnight, his coat mud-stained. When confronted, Sir Geoffrey scoffed. "A walk, nothing more. That path by the bridge is mine, whatever Hargrove claimed." His feud over the land, it seemed, burned hotter than he admitted. Miss Marple, strolling with Lady Amelia along the hollow bridge that evening, paused to study the river's flow. The water, dark and restless, mirrored the village's unease. "All these clues," she said softly. "The wax, the string, the clean pistol. They're like pebbles in a stream, scattered but leading somewhere." Lady Amelia frowned. "But the locked room, Jane. How could anyone get in and out?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Oh, my dear, locked doors are rarely as secure as they seem. It's the human heart that holds the real locks." Back at the vicarage, tensions flared. Mrs. Hargrove, emboldened by her confession, accused Neville of greed. "You'd sell your own soul for that inheritance," she snapped. Neville retorted, "And you'd ruin us all for your precious doctor." Silas, overheard in the garden, muttered darkly about city folk and their schemes, his gaze lingering on Dr. Blackwood. Lizzie, serving tea, dropped a cup when Craddock mentioned the love note, her hands shaking. Only Sir Geoffrey remained aloof, his joviality a thin veneer over something colder. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window at Worthington Manor, her knitting a steady rhythm. The village lay quiet, the church spire a dark silhouette against the stars. She thought of the clues, the wax drip, perhaps from a candle used in secret. The string, a tool for some clever trick. The stopped clock, not just broken but stopped deliberately. The locked room was no fortress, she sensed, but a stage for a carefully crafted illusion. And behind it all, a killer whose motives, love, greed, revenge, or something deeper, were beginning to take shape. Chapter 6. Deeper Secrets. The morning of October 14, 1925, dawned gray over Hollow Bridge, the village wrapped in a fog that seemed to mirror the murk of its secrets. The vicarage, its ivy-clad walls damp with mist, stood as a silent sentinel of the tragedy within. Reverend Thomas Hargrove's death, shot in a locked study, key inside, windows bolted, remained an enigma, baffling Inspector Harold Craddock and drawing whispers from every corner of the parish. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag a constant companion, moved through the village with quiet purpose, her gentle smile masking a mind that wove clues like threads in a tapestry. At Worthington Manor, Lady Amelia Worthington watched her friend with growing anticipation, sensing that the spinster was closing in on the truth. Inspector Craddock, his patience fraying, gathered the household for another round of questions, his notebook now a patchwork of contradictions. The locked room puzzled him most. No hidden exits, no forced entry, yet the gunshot's silence defied logic. "Someone's lying," he muttered, pacing the vicarage drawing room. "Or something's been missed." His eyes lingered on the suspects: Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, Dr. Reginald Blackwood, Neville Hargrove, Lizzie Croft, Silas Thorne, and the ever-present Sir Geoffrey Langford, each a piece in a puzzle that refused to fit. Miss Marple, seated by the fire, her needles clicking softly, had spent the previous evening sifting through the clues. The wax drip on the desk, not from the lamp. The frayed string under the rug. The stopped clock at 12:05. The clean pistol barrel. Each hinted at a carefully staged scene, but the motive remained elusive. As Craddock questioned the household, new revelations emerged, each a twist in the labyrinth of deceit. The first came from a hidden drawer in the vicar's desk, uncovered by Craddock's meticulous search. Inside lay a leather-bound diary, its pages filled with Hargrove's spidery script. The entries, dating back years, revealed a shocking secret. The vicar himself had once had an affair decades ago with a young parishioner in another parish. "I have borne the guilt," he wrote, "but her silence costs me dearly." The final entry, dated the day before his death, was cryptic. "She threatens to speak. I cannot allow it." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Blackmail?" he mused aloud. Who was this woman? The diary offered no name, but its weight hung over the room like a storm cloud. Mrs. Hargrove, her face ashen, denied knowledge of the affair. "Thomas was a private man," she said, her voice trembling. "He never spoke of his past." Yet her hands twisted her lavender-scented handkerchief, betraying her unease. Dr. Blackwood, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, his own affair with Eleanor now public knowledge. "Perhaps he feared exposure," Blackwood suggested, "but I knew nothing of this." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes noting the doctor's clenched jaw. Another twist surfaced when Craddock revisited the village gossip. A stranger had been seen near the hollow bridge on the night of the murder, described as a tall figure in a dark coat. The local baker, delivering loaves at dawn, swore he'd seen the man slip into the shadows. Craddock pursued the lead only to find the stranger was a harmless peddler, passing through with no connection to the vicar. A red herring, it seemed, but Miss Marple frowned. "Curious," she murmured to Lady Amelia. "How distractions appear just when clarity is needed." The investigation deepened with a closer look at Sir Geoffrey Langford's feud with the vicar. A dusty deed found in the vicarage archives suggested Hargrove had forged a claim to the bridge path, undermining Langford's family estate. Confronted, Sir Geoffrey's jovial mask slipped. "He cheated my father years ago," he admitted, his voice low. "I confronted him last month, demanded he retract the claim. He laughed in my face." Motive: a simmering grudge now fueled by legal betrayal. Yet Sir Geoffrey's alibi, a midnight walk, remained unverified, and Miss Marple noted mud on his boots matching the vicarage garden's soil. Neville Hargrove and Lizzie Croft's alliance came under sharper scrutiny. Craddock, tipped off by Miss Marple's observation, searched Neville's room and found a hidden stash of letters. Love notes between him and Lizzie, laced with plans to secure the future. One in Lizzie's hand read, "Once he's gone, we'll be free." Neville, cornered, insisted it referred to waiting out the vicar's natural death. "We're in love," he said defiantly, "but we're no killers." Lizzie, tearful, nodded. "I'd never hurt him, sir." Yet Miss Marple noted the ink on Lizzie's apron, matching the torn letter in the study. "Love," she said softly, "can make fools of us all." A new clue emerged in the study, overlooked until now. A faint scratch on the window latch, barely visible. Craddock dismissed it as wear, but Miss Marple examined it closely, her gloved fingers tracing the mark. "Not wear," she said to herself. "Purpose." The latch, though bolted, showed signs of being worked loose, then reset. The string under the rug, she suspected, was no accident. Perhaps part of a mechanism to lock the door from outside. The wax drip, she now believed, came from a candle used in the dark, its light hidden to avoid detection. But how had the shot gone unheard? Craddock tested the pistol again, this time in the vicarage garden. The report echoed, startling villagers a quarter-mile away. "Impossible," he said, shaking his head. "Unless—" He trailed off, eyeing the study's heavy curtains. Miss Marple, following his gaze, suggested, "A muffler, perhaps? Something to silence the shot?" The idea lingered, unproven but tantalizing. The village, meanwhile, churned with suspicion. At the Red Lion, locals whispered of curses and old grudges. Mrs. Hargrove's affair with Blackwood was now common knowledge, fueling gossip about her motives. Neville and Lizzie's romance, once a secret, drew scorn from those who saw them as gold diggers. Silas Thorne, overheard in the churchyard, muttered about justice for unpaid wages, his war-worn hands clenching. Sir Geoffrey at the manor laughed off accusations but avoided Craddock's questions. Miss Marple, walking the hollow bridge with Lady Amelia that evening, paused to watch the river's flow, its surface catching the fading light. "The truth," she said softly, "is like this river, always moving but hidden beneath the surface. The diary, the scratch, the wax, their currents pulling us toward the source." Lady Amelia shivered. "Do you think the killer's among them, Jane?" Miss Marple's smile was faint. "Oh, yes. And they're growing careless." At Worthington Manor, dinner was a tense affair. Mrs. Hargrove barely spoke, her eyes on her untouched plate. Dr. Blackwood's calm demeanor cracked, his hand shaking as he poured wine. Neville and Lizzie exchanged furtive glances, their alliance strained under scrutiny. Silas, seen lingering outside, refused an invitation to join. Sir Geoffrey, his laughter forced, recounted tales of his estate, but his eyes darted to the vicarage across the valley. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting a steady rhythm. The church spire loomed against the stars, its off-key bell a reminder of the village's unease. The locked room, she knew, was no true barrier, only a clever illusion. The diary's secrets, the scratched latch, the muffled shot. They pointed to a killer who planned meticulously, but overlooked the small details that Miss Marple's eyes never missed. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. By the evening of October 14, 1925, Hollow Bridge was a cauldron of tension, its quiet lanes charged with the electricity of an approaching storm. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, casting the village in a premature twilight, the ancient bridge a stark silhouette against the roiling sky. The vicarage, its ivy heavy with impending rain, stood as a monument to the unsolved murder of Reverend Thomas Hargrove, shot in a locked study with no clear path for the killer's escape. Inspector Harold Craddock, his patience worn thin, paced the vicarage drawing room, his notebook a tangle of clues that refused to align. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag at her side, sat quietly at Worthington Manor, where Lady Amelia Worthington had gathered the suspects for a dinner meant to ease tensions, but instead fanned their flames. The air in the manor's dining room crackled with unease, the clink of silverware sharp against the silence. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, her face pale as the linen tablecloth, picked at her meal, her lavender-scented handkerchief clutched tightly. Dr. Reginald Blackwood, seated across from her, maintained a strained composure, his affair with Eleanor now an open wound. Neville Hargrove, the vicar's nephew, slouched in his chair, his charm eroded by suspicion, his eyes darting to Lizzie Croft, the maid, who served with trembling hands. Silas Thorne, the gardener, had declined the invitation but was seen lurking near the manor gates, his war-scarred face grim in the gathering dusk. Sir Geoffrey Langford, the squire, arrived with his usual bluster, but his laughter rang hollow, his gaze fixed on the vicarage across the valley. Craddock, invited as a guest but ever the investigator, used the dinner to press his inquiries. "The locked room," he said, his voice cutting through the clatter, "is no longer a mystery in itself. We know it's possible to lock the door from outside. Miss Marple's string suggests a trick." He paused, eyeing the table. But the silent shot, the clean pistol, the wax drip, someone here knows more than they're saying. The room stilled, forks hovering mid-air. Accusations erupted like thunder. Mrs. Hargrove, her voice sharp with desperation, pointed at Neville. "You were after his money. You broke into the safe. Don't deny it." Neville's face reddened. "And you'd have killed him to run off with your doctor lover," he shot back. Dr. Blackwood rose, his chair scraping. "Watch your tongue, boy. I'd never harm a soul, but Hargrove's threats to my career gave you plenty of reason." Lizzie, setting down a tray, flinched as Neville's gaze met hers. Their secret alliance now a public stain. "We're no killers," Lizzie whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Sir Geoffrey, swirling his wine, scoffed. "This is nonsense. Hargrove brought this on himself, meddling in my land rights, forging deeds." His words drew gasps, and Craddock's pencil scratched furiously. "Careful, Sir Geoffrey," the inspector warned. "Your feud's no secret, and your midnight walk's unverified." Silas, glimpsed through the window, muttered something about city folk and their greed, his words carried by the rising wind. Miss Marple, her knitting needles a steady rhythm, watched the storm within the room mirror the one outside. Lightning flashed, illuminating the suspects' faces, each a mask of fear, guilt, or defiance. She noted new details, a faint burn mark on Dr. Blackwood's cuff, barely visible, a nervous twitch in Lizzie's fingers as she cleared plates. Neville's cufflink matching one found near the study door. The vicar's diary, now in Craddock's possession, weighed heavily on her mind. Its revelation of Hargrove's past affair hinted at blackmail. But by whom? The torn letter, the scratched latch, the wax drip, all pointed to a calculated act, not a spontaneous crime. A new twist emerged when Craddock revealed a discovery from the gunsmith. The pistol had been tampered with, its firing pin slightly altered to reduce the shot's report. "Not enough to silence it completely," Craddock said, "but enough to muffle it, especially with a pillow or cloth." He eyed the suspects. Someone knew how to handle a gun, and how to stage a scene. Silas, a war veteran, shifted uncomfortably, his hands too unsteady for such precision due to an old injury. Neville, however, had boasted of shooting in London clubs, and Dr. Blackwood's medical knowledge included forensic tricks. The room buzzed with suspicion, each accusation a spark in the gathering storm. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, ventured a quiet observation. "The wax drip, Inspector, it's not just candle wax, it's sealing wax, the kind used for letters. And the clock stopped at 12:05. Someone ensured it stayed that way." Craddock nodded, his eyes narrowing. "You're suggesting a staged timeline?" Miss Marple's smile was faint. "I'm suggesting someone wanted us to believe the vicar died at midnight when perhaps he didn't." The dinner dissolved into chaos as the storm broke outside, rain lashing the manor's windows. Mrs. Hargrove, near tears, accused Sir Geoffrey of sneaking into the vicarage to settle his feud. "You were seen by the bridge," she cried. Sir Geoffrey slammed his fist on the table. "Lies! You and Blackwood had more to gain." Neville, emboldened, pointed at Lizzie. "She knew everything. Overheard his secrets, didn't you?" Lizzie gasped, dropping a glass that shattered on the floor. "I never," she protested, but her eyes betrayed fear. Craddock, struggling to maintain order, announced a reconstruction of the crime the next morning. "We'll test the room, the pistol, everything," he declared. "Someone here knows how it was done." As the guests dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the storm-tossed valley. The hollow bridge, barely visible through the rain, seemed to whisper its own secrets. "The truth," she murmured to Lady Amelia, "is like this storm, wild, but it clears the air in time." Back at the vicarage, Craddock re-examined the study, guided by Miss Marple's hints. The sealing wax, he confirmed, matched a broken seal in the wastebasket, suggesting a letter opened in haste. The string, now analyzed, bore traces of oil as if pulled through a mechanism. The scratched latch, when tested, moved more freely than expected, hinting at manipulation. "Someone staged this," Craddock said, his voice low. "But who?" Miss Marple, returning to Worthington Manor, sat by her window, the storm's rhythm echoing her thoughts. The vicar's diary, the tampered pistol, the sealed letter, they pointed to a killer who planned meticulously, yet left traces of their humanity. "It's always the small things," she said softly, her needles clicking. "A burn, a stain, a glance. They betray the heart." Chapter 8. Unraveling Threads. The morning of October 15, 1925, broke over Hollow Bridge with a fragile calm, the storm of the previous night leaving the village sodden but quiet. The ancient bridge glistened with rain, its stones reflecting the pale sunlight, while the vicarage stood somber, its ivy heavy with dew. The murder of Reverend Thomas Hargrove, shot in a locked study, key inside, windows bolted, remained a puzzle that gnawed at Inspector Harold Craddock's logic. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag ever at her side, moved through Worthington Manor with the quiet certainty of one nearing the heart of the mystery. Lady Amelia Worthington, her friend and host, watched with bated breath, sensing that the spinster's gentle demeanor hid a mind closing in on the killer. Inspector Craddock, his mustache twitching with renewed purpose, had planned a reconstruction of the crime in the vicarage study, hoping to crack the locked room enigma. The household gathered reluctantly. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, pale and drawn. Dr. Reginald Blackwood, his calm fraying. Neville Hargrove, sullen and defensive. Lizzie Croft, her eyes darting nervously. Silas Thorne, gruff and silent. And Sir Geoffrey Langford, his joviality a thin mask. The air was thick with suspicion, each suspect a thread in a tapestry Miss Marple was quietly unraveling. Craddock began in the study, the scene unchanged. The blood-stained desk, the stopped clock at 12:05, the oil lamp, the pistol. He held up the frayed string Miss Marple had found, now confirmed to bear traces of oil. "This," he said, "was used to lock the door from outside, a simple trick, threaded through the keyhole, pulled to turn the key, then tugged free." He demonstrated, looping a similar string through the lock, turning it with a deft pull. The door clicked shut, the key in place. "Clever," he admitted, "but it doesn't tell us who." Miss Marple, standing by the window, her needles clicking softly, nodded. "A clever trick indeed, Inspector, but the silence of the shot is the real puzzle." She pointed to the wax strip on the desk, now identified as sealing wax. "And this used to seal something, perhaps a cloth to muffle the pistol." Craddock's eyes lit up. A pillow, maybe, wrapped in cloth to catch residue. He examined the curtains, finding faint traces of wax and powder burns. "Someone thought this through," he muttered. The reconstruction deepened the mystery. Craddock fired a test shot in the study, using a pillow to muffle it. The sound was dampened but still audible, suggesting the killer had used something more effective, perhaps a specially prepared cloth. The clean pistol barrel, tampered firing pin, and stopped clock pointed to a staged timeline, designed to make the death appear a midnight suicide. "The killer was in this room," Craddock declared, "and they knew the vicar's habits." Accusations flared anew. Neville, his voice sharp, pointed at Dr. Blackwood. "You're a doctor. You'd know how to stage a suicide, tamper with a gun." Blackwood's face darkened. "And you'd kill for his money, Hargrove. Those debts of yours aren't secret." Mrs. Hargrove, her composure cracking, accused Sir Geoffrey. "You hated him over that land. I saw you near the vicarage that night." Sir Geoffrey laughed, but his eyes were cold. "You're desperate, Eleanor. Your affair gave you reason enough." Lizzie, clearing teacups, flinched at every raised voice, while Silas outside muttered about justice for the wronged. Miss Marple, observing quietly, shared a partial revelation. "The scratched latch," she said to Craddock, "suggests the window was opened briefly, then rebolted. The string locked the door, but the wax and burns point to a muffled shot, perhaps a cloth sealed to contain residue." She paused, her eyes on the suspects. The killer needed access, knowledge, and nerve, and they needed a reason stronger than we've yet seen. A new clue emerged, shifting the focus. Craddock, searching the vicar's papers, found a coded note tucked inside a hymn book, overlooked until now. The note in Hargrove's hand listed initials, EHRBNHLCSTGL, beside cryptic phrases betrayal, greed, secrets. He suspected them all, Craddock said, his voice low. But why? Miss Marple, examining the note, noted its ink matched the torn letter in the wastebasket. "He was writing to someone," she murmured, "warning them or threatening them." The diary's revelation of Hargrove's past affair took on new weight. Lady Amelia, assisting Miss Marple, recalled village gossip about a young woman who left Hollow Bridge years ago rumored to have borne a child. "Could it be blackmail?" Amelia asked. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Or guilt, turned to fear." The vicar's past was catching up with him. Suspicion deepened around Dr. Blackwood when Craddock found a medical journal in his practice, open to a page on gunshot forensics. "Studying how to fake a suicide?" Craddock asked sharply. Blackwood bristled. "I study many things. Hargrove's threats to my license drove me to research, nothing more." Yet Miss Marple noted the burn mark on his cuff, faint but telling. A trace of wax, perhaps? Neville and Lizzie's alliance crumbled under pressure. Craddock caught Lizzie slipping a note to Neville, intercepted before it could be read. "Planning something?" he demanded. Lizzie, tearful, admitted, "We only wanted the inheritance. We never meant murder." Neville's silence spoke volumes, his cufflink gleaming like a guilty beacon. Silas, questioned again, revealed a war injury that made shooting impossible. His hands trembled too much. "I hated him," he admitted, "but I didn't kill him." Sir Geoffrey's alibi weakened when a villager confirmed seeing him near the vicarage, not the bridge, at midnight. "A mistake," he blustered, but his confidence wavered. Miss Marple, walking the manor gardens with Lady Amelia, paused by the hollow bridge as dusk fell. The river's murmur echoed her thoughts. "The coded note, the wax, the tampered gun, they're all threads," she said softly. "The killer wove a clever web, but they've left loose ends." Amelia frowned. "But the locked room, Jane. How did they escape?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "They didn't escape. They were never trapped." At the manor, the suspects dined in silence, the weight of Craddock's reconstruction hanging heavy. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes avoided Blackwood's. Neville and Lizzie sat apart, Silas lurked outside, and Sir Geoffrey's laughter was forced. Miss Marple, her knitting a steady rhythm, watched them all, her mind piecing together the final pattern. The truth, she knew, was close, a single thread waiting to be pulled. Chapter 9. The Final Clue. The morning of October 16, 1925, dawned crisp over Hollow Bridge, the village bathed in a golden light that belied the darkness of its secrets. The ancient stone bridge sparkled with dew, and the vicarage, its ivy glistening, stood as a silent witness to the murder of Reverend Thomas Hargrove. The locked study, door sealed, windows bolted, key inside, had yielded clues but no answers, frustrating Inspector Harold Craddock's dogged pursuit. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag a quiet companion, moved through Worthington Manor with the calm of one who sensed the puzzle's pieces falling into place. Lady Amelia Worthington, her friend and confidant, watched with quiet anticipation, knowing Miss Marple was close to unraveling the truth. Inspector Craddock, his mustache bristling with determination, gathered the household in the vicarage drawing room for what he called a final push. The suspects, Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, Dr. Reginald Blackwood, Neville Hargrove, Lizzie Croft, Silas Thorne, and Sir Geoffrey Langford, sat in uneasy silence, their faces a gallery of guilt, fear, and defiance. The air was heavy with the weight of accusations, each clue a spark in the tinderbox of suspicion. Craddock's notebook, now a thick ledger of contradictions, lay open, but it was Miss Marple's quiet presence that commanded the room. Craddock began with a review of the evidence. The frayed string used to lock the door from outside, the tampered pistol, its firing pin altered to muffle the shot, the stopped clock at 12:05 suggesting a staged timeline, the ceiling wax drip hinting at a muffled shot. "We're close," he said, his voice firm. "The killer is in this room, but one piece is missing." His eyes scanned the suspects, lingering on each face. Miss Marple, her knitting needles clicking softly, had spent the night piecing together the clues. The vicar's diary, revealing his past affair and fear of blackmail, had shifted her perspective. The coded note, listing the suspect's initials, suggested Hargrove knew his enemies. The scratched window latch, the oil-slick string, the wax drip, all pointed to a killer who planned meticulously but left traces of their humanity. Yet one detail nagged at her, a thread left dangling. The wax was not just sealing wax, but a specific type, red and flecked with gold, used for formal correspondence. Her breakthrough came during a quiet moment in the vicarage study permitted by Craddock for a final inspection. Kneeling by the desk, Miss Marple examined the wax drip anew. "Not just a candle," she murmured to Lady Amelia, who hovered nearby. "This wax sealed a cloth, likely a pillowcase used to muffle the shot." She pointed to faint powder burns on the curtains, overlooked in the initial sweep. The killer wrapped the pistol in a cloth, sealed it with wax to contain residue, and fired through a pillow to silence the sound. The wax dripped in the process. Amelia gasped. But who would know to do such a thing? Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the bookshelf, where a volume on forensic science, borrowed from Dr. Blackwood's practice, sat slightly askew. "Someone with knowledge," she said softly, "and access." She lifted the book, finding a faint trace of red wax on its spine, matching the drip. "The final clue," she whispered, her mind racing. Craddock, meanwhile, pressed the suspects. Mrs. Hargrove, her lavender-scented handkerchief trembling, insisted her affair with Blackwood was no motive for murder. "Thomas was cruel, but I couldn't kill him," she said, her voice breaking. Dr. Blackwood, his burn-marked cuff hidden under a fresh shirt, denied tampering with the pistol. "I'm a healer, not a killer," he said, but his eyes avoided Miss Marple's gaze. Neville, cornered about his theft from the safe, snapped, "I needed money, not blood." Lizzie, her alliance with Neville exposed, clutched her apron, its ink stain a silent accusation. Silas, his war injury ruling out precise shooting, grumbled, "I'd have throttled him, not shot him." Sir Geoffrey, his feud over the bridge path now public, laughed off suspicion. "I'm no sneak creeping into locked rooms." A new detail emerged when Craddock re-examined the coded note. The phrase beside R.B., Dr. Blackwood's initials, read, "Secrets buried." "What secrets?" Craddock demanded. Blackwood paled but said nothing. Miss Marple, recalling the vicar's diary, ventured a theory. "The vicar knew something about you, Doctor," she said gently. "Something beyond the affair. Something criminal?" Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. The final clue crystallized when Miss Marple revisited the study's wastebasket. Among the torn papers, she found a fragment of a letter, its red wax seal flecked with gold. The handwriting matched the vicar's, but the recipient's name was burned away. "This letter," she said to Craddock, "was sealed with the wax that dripped. It was opened in haste, perhaps by the killer." The fragment read, "Your crimes will not stay hidden. I know what you've done. Craddock's eyes widened. Blackmail, he said. But who was he threatening? Miss Marple's mind turned to Dr. Blackwood. The forensic book, the burn mark, the wax trace, all pointed to him. His medical knowledge could stage a suicide, his affair with Eleanor gave motive, and the vicar's diary hinted at a darker secret. The vicar discovered something, she said softly to Amelia. Perhaps illegal practices, procedures that cross ethical lines. She recalled village whispers of women visiting Blackwood's practice late at night, leaving in secrecy. Craddock, guided by Miss Marple's hints, confronted Blackwood. What did Hargrove know? He demanded. Blackwood's composure cracked. He was delusional, he said, his voice shaking. Accused me of things I'd never do. But Miss Marple's eyes caught the lie, the faint tremor in his hand, the wax on his cuff. The village, meanwhile, buzzed with rumors. At the Red Lion, locals spoke of Blackwood's late-night patience, of Hargrove's sermons on sin growing fiercer in recent weeks. Neville and Lizzie, their romance now a scandal, avoided each other, their plans unraveling. Silas, seen sharpening his shears, muttered about cleaning up messes. Sir Geoffrey at the manor dismissed the gossip, but avoided the vicarage, his feud unresolved. As evening fell, Miss Marple walked the hollow bridge with Lady Amelia, the river's murmur a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. The wax, the letter, the book, they're the final threads, she said. The killer thought to bury their tracks, but they forgot the small things. Amelia shivered. Is it Blackwood, Jane? Miss Marple's smile was faint. The truth is close, my dear. One more step and the pattern will be clear. At Worthington Manor, the suspects dined in silence, the weight of the investigation pressing down. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes were haunted, Blackwood's hands unsteady, Neville and Lizzie distant, Silas absent, Sir Geoffrey's laughter forced. Miss Marple, her knitting a steady rhythm, watched them all, her mind fixed on the final clue. A doctor's knowledge, a sealed secret, a muffled shot. The killer was in reach, their mask nearly off. Chapter 10. Justice at Dawn. The morning of October 17, 1925, broke over Hollow Bridge with a serene clarity, the fog lifting to reveal a village bathed in soft sunlight. The ancient stone bridge gleamed, its arches reflecting the river's gentle flow, while the vicarage, its ivy glistening with dew, stood as a quiet monument to the tragedy within. Reverend Thomas Hargrove's murder, shot in a locked study, key inside, windows bolted, had gripped the village for days, baffling Inspector Harold Craddock and stirring whispers of guilt and deceit. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag a constant companion, had woven the clues into a tapestry of truth, and now at Worthington Manor she prepared to unravel the final pattern. Lady Amelia Worthington, sensing the moment's weight, had invited the household to the manor's grand drawing room for what she called a final gathering. The suspects, Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, Dr. Reginald Blackwood, Neville Hargrove, Lizzie Croft, Silas Thorne, and Sir Geoffrey Langford, arrived with faces drawn, their nerves frayed by days of scrutiny. Inspector Craddock, his notebook tucked away, stood by the fireplace, his mustache still but his eyes alert. The air was thick with anticipation, the room's heavy curtains drawn to let in the morning light, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Miss Marple, seated in a high-backed chair, her knitting needle silent for once, surveyed the group with her gentle, piercing gaze. A terrible tragedy has befallen Hollow Bridge, she began, her voice soft but commanding. Reverend Hargrove's death was no accident nor suicide, but a murder most carefully planned. Today we shall see justice served. The room stilled, every eye fixed on her. She began with the locked room, the heart of the mystery. The door locked from inside, the key in place, the windows bolted, yet the killer entered and left without trace, she said. Or so it seemed. The frayed string found under the rug was pulled through the keyhole to turn the lock from outside, a simple but clever trick. Craddock nodded, his reconstruction confirmed. But the silent shot, Miss Marple continued, required more ingenuity. The pistol, tampered to reduce its report, was fired through a pillow wrapped in a cloth sealed with red wax flecked with gold to contain residue. The wax dripped, leaving its mark on the desk. She turned to the stopped clock. The time, 12:05, was staged. The clock was jammed deliberately to suggest a midnight death. But the vicar died later when the house was quiet and the killer needed only moments to act. Her eyes swept the room, lingering on each suspect. The question is not how, but why, and who. Mrs. Hargrove, her lavender-scented handkerchief trembling, whispered, "I loved him once, but he was cruel. I didn't kill him." Neville, his cufflink glinting, snapped, "It wasn't me. I wanted his money, not his life." Lizzie, her apron stained with ink, clutched Neville's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Silas, standing by the door, growled, "I'd no hand in it. My hands can't hold a gun steady." Sir Geoffrey, his joviality gone, muttered, "This is madness. I had a feud, not a murder plot." Dr. Blackwood, his face pale, said nothing, his burn-marked cuff hidden under a sleeve. Miss Marple's voice grew firmer. "The clues point to one among you, the wax, the tampered pistol, the coded note, the diary, all tell a story of knowledge and motive." She held up the torn letter fragment, its red wax seal gleaming. This letter, written by the vicar, threatened to expose a secret, not an affair, but something darker. Crimes hidden in plain sight. She turned to Dr. Blackwood. "Doctor, you are a man of skill, trained in forensics, capable of staging a suicide. The book in the vicar's study, borrowed from your practice, bore traces of the same wax found on your cuff. The vicar knew your secret, not just your love for Mrs. Hargrove, but your illegal activities." The room gasped. Blackwood's eyes widened. "What nonsense!" he protested, but his voice shook. Miss Marple continued, relentless. "The vicar discovered you were performing illegal abortions, doctor, for women in desperate need. He threatened to expose you, ruin your career, and send you to prison. That night you used a duplicate key, kept from your visits to Eleanor, to enter the study. You sedated the vicar with his own prescription, tampered with the pistol, and fired through a wax-sealed cloth wrapped around a pillow, muffling the shot. You locked the door with the string trick, pulling it through the keyhole, and scratched the window latch to suggest another entry, a red herring to mislead." Blackwood rose, his face ashen. "You've no proof." Craddock stepped forward, holding the forensic book and a vial of sedative found in Blackwood's bag, its dosage matching traces in the vicar's blood. "We tested the wax," Craddock said. "It matches your sealing kit. And the burned cloth found in your garden incinerator holds gunshot residue." Blackwood's shoulders slumped. "He was a hypocrite," he whispered. "Preaching virtue while hiding his own sins. He'd have destroyed me, Eleanor, everything." Eleanor gasped, tears streaming. "Reginald, no." Blackwood's confession spilled out. The vicar's threats, the planned murder, the careful staging. "I wanted to protect us," he said, his voice breaking. Craddock signaled the constable, who led Blackwood away in handcuffs. The room fell silent, the weight of justice settling like dust. Mrs. Hargrove sobbed quietly. Neville and Lizzie clung to each other. Silas nodded grimly. And Sir Geoffrey stared at the floor, his feud irrelevant now. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needles a soft rhythm in the stillness. "Human nature," she said to Lady Amelia, "is the key to every lock. Greed, love, fear, they betray us all." As the suspects dispersed, Hollow Bridge exhaled, its peace fragile but restored. The church bell rang, its note clear for the first time in days. Miss Marple, walking the hollow bridge with Amelia, paused to watch the river's flow. "The truth," she said softly, "is like this river, steady, inevitable, always finding its way." At Worthington Manor, the village began to heal. Mrs. Hargrove, freed from her husband's shadow, faced her future. Neville and Lizzie, their plans thwarted, parted ways. Silas returned to his roses, Sir Geoffrey to his estate. Miss Marple, packing her knitting for her return to St. Mary Mead, smiled faintly. "Every village has its secrets," she said, "but none can hide forever."